Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and happy Halloween to end our Road to Halloween series for the year. Myself and Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp are jumping into the world of Freddy Krueger with a review for A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, a sequel to the hit Wes Craven horror film that both myself and Jack are pretty big fans of. This is a really fascinating film. While a lot of fans of the franchise really have disowned this and said it's just the worst of the franchise, some even going as far as to say unwatchable, it has also been reevaluated as a queer expression. There was a really great documentary a few years back that tackled the main lead of the film and how the film affected his life. This is a deep and rich film to celebrate here on Halloween as our Halloween special, and I am so excited to get into a full review and full discussion of A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge. Without further ado, let's get to that episode right now. Okay, happy Halloween, Jack. Thank you so much for joining me on the holiday for another Halloween special. This is always one of my most anticipated episodes of the year, but also one of the most stressful for me programming, because it's like, what fits so well for Halloween? But I knew from last year, and I'll start with this one, that I had to do a podcast. We had to talk about A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. I will give my intro to this and my experience. I had seen the first Nightmare on Elm Street multiple times. I love that film. I think it's like a masterclass in horror. Such good lore, such good. It's a very dark film, obviously, and very traumatic. But this look at this repressed trauma, generational trauma from these horrific events, shaping in the way that it does in that film, I think is so unique and so well done from Wes Craven. And I always heard that the rest of the franchise was good. So last Halloween, I set out to watch them all. And I always heard number 2 had this gay subtext, and we'll get into it. So I watched number 2. I felt really, let's say, positive is what I'll say now. And then I watched the rest of them, and I didn't like any of the others. This is not a franchise for me. I turned out super disappointed with where this goes. I know some people are really charmed by like Dream Warriors and stuff. Not for me. The exception is, of course, the Wes Craven's New Nightmare. That is phenomenal. But outside of that, this is not my type of series, with just where it goes narratively. But focusing on Freddy's 2, on part 2, again, was always told there was this queer subtext. And as a queer individual, obviously very exciting, very enticing, coming out as a horror movie in 1985, I was amazed with how explicit it was into its queerness. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the documentary. We'll talk about the performances. But this, I think, is such a good proof of concept for what this franchise should have been. Having a character like Freddy Krueger is such a strong way to look at the repression of anything, a repression of an identity, of a trauma, of an emotion, of a personality. And this is such a strong feature. I will be really honest that even past the gay stuff, and we'll get into the gay stuff, and I love that, and I think it shines so beautifully in this film, I think this is easily the best film in this franchise. I think this is such strong work, both on the thematic level, but also on the horror level, on the use of Freddy Krueger, on the inventiveness of how to use this character, on the bloodshed. This is a film that I think is near perfect, which is wild because there's a lot of people who think this is the worst film in the franchise, who hate this movie, who skip this movie, whatever. Good for you. I think out of everything I want from horror, especially this type of horror from this era, this just does everything, in my opinion, perfectly. So I'm really excited to get into it deeper. But first, I want to know your initial thoughts. First off, just like, when did you watch this? What is your history with this franchise? And then what are your thoughts on A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2?
I've only ever seen this film twice, and this is the second time I've seen it for this podcast. The first time I watched it was 9 years ago now, and I watched all of them the first time. I remember watching the first one barely, and then I think in 2016 I thought, well, I'll just watch all of them. I must have done it for Halloween. I'm not sure if I must have logged all of them for Letterboxd at one point. It might not have been Halloween, but I definitely watched all of them. And I don't mind saying it because I don't want to. It's not going to come across as bad, I hope, as I was saying it in my head. But when I watched the first one, and I watched this, the first impressions of this, not knowing about it, is this film is off. There's something not quite right about this film in the sense of what you've seen about the first film. And when you watch them back to back with no knowledge of the subtext or even the overall context of it, you just watch it. You can tell that this one is the odd one out for multiple different reasons. Two major ones. I'll start with the less major one in the sense of that it's far more less controversial. Is that this removes Freddy Krueger's initial um, rules and trials and his game from the first film, whereas in the first film he's only powerful in the dream world, whereas in this he comes out of that and he's in the real world and he's actually having the main character kill these people through him. Now that's the first slight misgiving about this in the sense of, well, it's different. And then you get back to the third one, Dream Child. I think it's is it Dream no it's Dream Child, Dream World, whatever they are. I don't know. They're so different. They're so distinctive with the titles. Freddy's Revenge. Who is he avenging? Because these people are new. Anyway, yes, it's a different ballpark in the sense of its formula. And then the secondary thing that you notice, which only you really get on initial, if you because it's so over, it's so over, it's covert. Is the homoerotic subtext, which when you're watching it, because I watched them back to back, I never noticed it. Although in my review I do mention it very briefly. Now, very much like you, last year I watched the documentary Scream Queen, which details the lead's actor's issues with the film and the fallout of what this cost him. And watching it and not watching the film again, because I don't really want to go back and watch these if I can help it, because they're just boring after a while. I was like, oh, this is interesting. It feels like an interesting one, especially just listening to someone's conversation about sexuality and identity and being out or open or whatever it is, in the sense of what this film documented for him is a tragedy in its own right. But having watched this film again, I actually agree with you. I think it's undoubtedly the strongest aspect of this film. I think that's unfortunately come with age. Now, this is going to sound somewhat like a counter. counter it's going to sound like counter to what I'm trying to say here, but when you watch these all together, this one stands out in the negative because it doesn't match the others. But when you take them out and you give them a little bit more air and a little bit more breathability, this ultimately stands out with those negatives as a positive because it's different. Now, the the definition of different is going to be very interesting on how people perceive this. But that definition of different to me elevates the material because of what it wants to present, good or bad in terms of how it was effective at the time or now. If you look at the film then, I think it tries to do something very different, and now works really well in being in ostracizing itself for the sacrifice of wanting to be different. Now, not to bring another film into this conversation, but it reminds me very similar to the reception of Glass, M. Night Shyamalan, which I think we're both major fans of. I was really impressed with that feature review. I love Glass, and obviously we've done this on ClapperCast. We've also spoke about it on Gems, I'm sure, as well. But the perception and reception of that film are two very different things. The film looks at itself as one thing and gives the audience an identity of where this is going to go, and is ultimately in fruition a totally different beast. It still has the same beats and same story and same type of set pieces, but the emphasis on certain other things are different to what the archetype type of superhero film is in the mainstream. A Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, is eerily similar in that it does not want to play in the archetype of what a 19 or 20-year-old viewer of this wants to go see, which is young girl getting pestered by a notorious evil character who's got paedophilic tendencies, who's gashing people and stabbing people and causing all sorts of mayhem, and it goes against the identity of the final girl. So ultimately, I think after a fact, I think this film has really prospered from its sacrifices in 1985. I mean, a year on. I mean, I don't know if do you know much about the history of this film, Carson?
Not really, not too much.
So this film started production for 2 weeks without Robert England. They refused to hire him because they thought that Freddy could be anyone behind a mask. So they hired a stand-in or a stunt guy who is actually in the film during the shower sequence. That's him because they didn't have the money to reshoot it. So a year after production, a year after release of the original, I think is 84. This is 85. They just steamroll this out, and there's loads of people, the writer, the producer, and the director, and especially the actor. They don't have a story that can corroborate each other. One says one thing, another says another, the other says another. So the identity is that one of them says that it's not openly gay, one of them says that it is openly gay. Then another one says that the main actor played it openly gay, and he says he didn't. He just played the screenplay. So there's a four people in this story. There's the producer, the director, the actor, and the writer. And I think all of them have got interesting inputs of it. Um, who to believe, I'm not too sure because it's an interesting time in the 80s, and I think you can definitely see this is a. I don't know how you feel. It's difficult to get my opinion of this because I wasn't there at the time, but I don't know how you feel about it. But it feels like it's trying to shock the audience more than make a point at times, as well, because there's stuff behind the scenes where they resisted a lot of more on the nose homoerotic tendencies between Freddy and Jesse. But in the same token, it still very much puts itself out there with very much on the nose visual cues of him dreaming and going to a S&M gay club or gay bar and meeting that the closeted gym teacher and stuff like that. So there's stuff like that, but then they refuse to have Freddy put his fingers or his knives in Jesse's mouth and stuff like that. I know there's interesting things where they go against what they're actually saying. Then you watch the film and it's very much doubling down. I know I'm rambling here, so I'll get back to the point. But I really like this. I think it's really interesting. I think it's one of the very few films which very much goes against type. It is very openly queer, and I think the fact that they quickly wanted to put this to bed as ultimately let it had a new lease of life to begin with, and I think it is one of the very much openly LGBTQ horror things. I think it is a scream queen that turns it on its head, and I think it is really effective. Aside from the Meryl Streep clone that they have here, I think the story is very interesting. I think it looks at issues of teenage sexuality and identity, and how darkness can creep in, isolation, manipulation, what it's like at home, responsibility of moving away, the issues of adulthood and pressure. There's a lot here that built up into a film that deals with a major issues of just identity crisis. And that's not to say that being queer is a crisis, but I just mean in how people um, come to not recognition of it, but come to claim who they are. And this is all through the prism of a Nightmare on Elm Street film, which those two things shouldn't really correlate. But I think it's quite effective. I don't know how, because obviously this is the first time you've watched this. It took me two goes to sort of appreciate it. But like you, I think if you look at the pantheon of the films, this ultimately stands out for the better, no doubt. I don't think it's better quality made in a sense of set pieces, or I
Yeah.
don't think it's as scary. But it's one of those surprising films in a horror movie where the actual um, narrative, the actual thematic weight of this film in a horror film as a sequel that should be just dead weight actually outweighs the film in itself.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, and I think we'd both recommend anyone at home go check out the documentary Scream Queen,
Yes.
not just because it gives a great look at the actors and these different stories from everyone and those emotions and the fallout of this, but also does a really great job at capturing what Hollywood and what the world was like at the time of release for queer individuals. And the actor discusses this heavily as far as if you were gay, you could only have certain roles. If you had HIV or AIDS, they gave blood tests, like you couldn't be out. Him as a closeted individual in this movie that is surrounded surrounded by queer text. I do reject this idea that some of the filmmakers project of like, it isn't really there, or it was supposed to be really minor and you weren't supposed to notice. The actor is just gay, so it came out. Where like literally a scene, and you described it, but let me describe it in detail to everyone. He dreams he goes to literally a gay SM bar, finds his gym teacher. His gym teacher is still wearing his like leather outfit, takes him to the high school, takes him to, punishes him by making him run laps, goes in the shower. He imagines his gym teacher getting tied up in towels in the shower naked, getting spanked in the butt with towels. Like, it's not like it's like that's with the stories around this and the conversation around this, I would expect this to be something where like you really have to look through like a certain lens, and then maybe they're talking in a certain language and you can decode it. Like, it just is explicitly gay. Like, it is explicitly gay to a point where like I think anyone, including the filmmakers or anyone at home who would want to argue that point or be like, is it just hidden in here? Like, it is literally just so gay. And I mean that in like a great way, because I think it thematically plays well. Every time he sees Freddy, pretty much, it is when he's with some boy or he's with some man and they are half naked, when he's having a sleepover with his friend, is when those, or he's dreaming. That is just temptation. That is just sexuality on screen. When he is trying to have sex with the girl, it's his tongue that becomes Freddy. He literally has to hold his tongue in the moment and run away from this girl, almost as if he was going to spill the truth that he wasn't into her and that he was gay. Like, it is so overt and it's so explicit that I think anyone who walked away from this not being like, oh, it's gay, I think you are like, there's something about you that is holding you back from seeing that or embracing that, because it's so explicitly queer. But I think in that, though, the film is not just queer to get a reaction or elicit a response or be exploitative in that way. But in this, you really get the sense of this boy, this teenage boy, who is dealing with his sexuality, dealing with these emotions and these thoughts and these desires he cannot control. As he goes to sleep, you cannot control what you're dreaming. He is dreaming of this sexuality. He's dreaming of these men. He's dreaming these things, and he's being torn apart as a result. Also putting it in the backdrop of a rich white suburban neighborhood and seeing how this one person's sexuality he feels like will tear this neighborhood apart. Yes, I think it is valid, and there are little nods to the previous film. He lives in the same house that she did. There's little bits and pieces here like that. And I think as a horror fan, if you just were really in depth and in love with the lore of that first film, I could see how this transition would be frustrating. Granted, then you should be even more frustrated by the rest of the films that really get off the rails. But at the same time, I think it plays into that even wonderfully to provide, again, this idea that Freddy is not necessarily this creature that just exists or this monster. It's not like Pennywise, who comes back to the same neighborhood and just whoever happens to be there, but really this embodiment of repression. I think that is brilliant. I think that is terrifying. I think that is emotional. I don't believe you've seen it, but on the podcast, me and Nick did a whole John Couture series, and in 1935, I want to say, he released Blood of the Poet, which is about this artist who keeps, no matter what he paints and what he draws, he keeps seeing this person in them, and he keeps getting pulled into this, and it's a representation of him as a queer artist, and whatever work he creates, he cannot escape the fact that inherently it is from a queer perspective, and his queerness is revealed. That is what this is. This is about a queer individual who is hiding from these and trying to escape this identity, but he cannot, because his body will betray him in those moments and will go back because he is gay. That is poetry. That is emotion. It is elevated to a point where, like, I don't even just think it's just, oh, it's cool because it's gay. I think it actually has something to say about a queer audience and about a queer individual and about queer life and queer belief and the queer brain and queer mind, and the queer soul. That, to me, like, I get goosebumps almost thinking about it, because I do think it's really poignant. And to release in 1985 in the middle of, the heightened conversation of AIDS, obviously gay rights is definitely not what it is now, or queer representation, to release as a main budget horror film, a sequel to this vastly successful, huge horror feature. That is a bold story that you just don't get. You don't get these releases. It's almost in itself like a dream, like a queer dream, within this franchise that some people, I guess, just want to wake up from. But I think it is something that cannot be overstated how special this film is. And I think the execution of it is brilliant.
I agree with you. There's a lot to discuss, a lot to break down, but I think in the context of the narrative here, I actually think it, like you said, I think it does it more of a service to how actually frightening Freddy Krueger is. He's not just looking at well, again, you've got to accept that the mythology evolves or changes, and once you can get past that, because it's not real. Not real people, guys. It's not a real person. It's just it's all written by someone. Don't worry. It's not. You don't have to be so. Um, Stuck to the guns about what these fictional characters are up to. But going back to the point, I think it makes him far more scarier. The fact that he's not just going for revenge for these kids through the parents or the actions of finding him, obviously because he was killing children or doing whatever to them, and doing it for retribution or revenge. That's chilling in its own right. But the fact that this is a character who is going to go after anyone, and the fact he's going after someone's sexual repressions, or even someone who's not even sure of who they are, and he can find the vulnerability there. I think that's really compelling. Even if someone's not in the same mind frame as that, I think that's still quite unnerving to know that the Freddy Krueger can go after anybody, and Michael Myers is just going after you know Jamie Lee Curtis for 4 films. It becomes quite mundane and boring. But then when you change that and Michael Myers goes after someone else, people reject that motif, and I think the same people have tried to do it here. Nancy and Freddy Krueger don't have to be aligned. They don't have to be mortal enemies. And the fact that they bring Nancy back for a third party character role in the sequel, the third film, sort of does more of an injustice here. This is a franchise. If you're going to use Freddy Krueger, that works. But he's able to go after other people for other reasons. He should be able to go after people. And granted, it's explored a little bit more in the sequels as a positive in that the vulnerability of how they see themselves, these kids, and what they stand for, and what's going on at home, and what's going on at school, and what they see reflections of themselves, if it's image, personality, etc. He goes after a multitude of issues that these kids or these teenagers face. But this one is a very much direct vulnerability, and this is the issue, I think, and not necessarily an issue, but this is the problem that arises with being so overtly homoerotic, is that the film then can be attacked on that front in a sense of, well, this film's just gay. Like, I don't want to go and watch this film because it's gay. I'm air quoting, but if anyone can, I'm not. It's not a quote from me. Not that if anyone's pulled that out of context,
We'll
but
use that as the quote on
yeah, no,
Letterboxd. Yeah.
that'll be the prologue before you go for the intro. I think, fuck, he's got me again. But no, I think because it's so overtly homoerotic and so overtly not, I think it's quite proud about what it's about, and not to say that it indulges itself on that, but it very much is on, like you said, it's on the nose. It's not hiding from that. And that's why I think the discretion of other people and behind the scenes, I think it's like a clusterfuck of wanting to take responsibility, but also a generation that's not quite in tuned about being honest and open about, well, this is a direct connotation of a society against people of a different sexuality due to the issues of AIDS or HIV, or just because there's a prejudice against it. I mean, that's 1985. We're now in 2025. Just openly say it. I don't think that that's necessarily negative. That you're going to be open and honest if that was your opinion as a 30-year-old or a 20-year-old writing a screenplay. That you use Freddy Krueger as a voice to manipulate that. That's a projection of art form. That's fine. But if you're in your room now and going, burn the flag, burn the trans flag, like that, yeah, we have problems about that. But if you're going to project insecurities of culture on the art form, that's what art's about. So what the reason why people have not taken responsibility for that, or even come out and not accepted it, but had that discussion, I find perplexed. But anyway, getting back to the point. But the issue of this being so openly homoerotic is that it leaves itself up for quite a lot of stray bullets, and I think the audiences then go back and say, well, it's not really, it's just gay, like, that's not the operandi, but that's evolution. And the other thing about that is that when you look at the franchise in itself, The one thing that not many people talk about is that this saved New Line from going bankrupt. That this film made quite a decent amount of money. The fact it was a year out, and there's a little bit of a, I think it's 87, which Dream Child comes out, which is 2 years later than this. There's obviously a pause there, and like we need to get people back on track. But this film's the genesis of saving New Line, so that you could pump out 8 of these bastards and a remake. So that this film has quite a lot of longevity, and it has quite a lot of attributes to say that, well, we were highly successful. And the fact that then in 1985, like you said, is then pushed back by audiences, and then not necessarily critics, but let's say producers or people who are behind the scenes here, I find quite strange, because if this is a success, I mean, what do they deem as successful? That the fact that they go against that now and go back to making the same film over and over and over. And yes, this is similar, but it takes different stripes and strides to get there. I just find that very interesting. I think people were just ultimately afraid of being like, yeah, we made a character who was queer, was had issues, not issues, but had wasn't confident in who they were or didn't know who they were, and we used a horror icon who found that vulnerability, and that's what Freddy Krueger will be. He will find vulnerability in the fact that when you put your head at sleep at night and you're out, he's going to be there. And then your nightmare of living a life which you're closeted homosexual, this film projects, is that he's living two nightmares. There's a very horrifying nature to that you can't even get solace, or you can't even find even a remote place of calm or tranquility. That's frightening, and I think it works really well. Um, yeah, I think the performances are good as well. I think everything here is like quite interesting. Again, I think there's a few set pieces. I think how it's shot at the pool sequence. I think I've read that the director actually walked off set because he thought it was stupid. And I think the first AD shot that, and you can tell it looks terrible. After the his friend is killed and his parents are at the door, when Freddy like materializes at the pool, I think it just goes rapidly downhill. Then I think how that's shot, how that's crafted is just poor. But then I think when you get back into the mine, or I don't know, the wherever they are in the third act, I think it has something about it. I think his girlfriend Meryl Streep, number two, I think she's quite good in this as well. But it's just that I think what makes this tick is just that vulnerability,
Yeah.
that major factor of you just cannot escape. It's traumatizing. It's trauma inducing as well. We've all had days where going to sleep at night is a reprieve from the traumas and terrors that you face in real life, but you have to wake up and face them the next day. It's a horrible thing to have in fruition as a human being. And I think the nightmare here, which works really well, obviously Freddy Krueger's motif, is that this kid can't escape that. And also there's issues. I keep on saying issues. I don't mean to say that, but there's also explorations and an openness or closetedness that he's trying to face. Just exploration. I think it is quite makes for a really compelling horror film. But what I wanted to ask you though is interesting that because obviously we keep on mentioning 1985. I can't imagine another era where this would work because now, I mean, it would just be politicized now, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
You couldn't make it now. You could do, but it wouldn't. I don't know. It would feel like it would feel more exploitative now. I don't know. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, it would not work now. I mean, also tying it directly to like murder and death and blood, like it would.
Yeah.
It's not a film that I think Freddy Krueger in general, and we saw this in 2010, where like I don't think this character is one that exists in 2025 or in modern times in a way that works. I don't think that comprehends with our current audience. I'm sure one day we'll eventually try again and we'll see. But especially trying to tie queerness to it, I think now, yeah, it would not connect the same way. Because here you really get that sense of like they can't say it's gay, and there's that repression angle that you wouldn't get now. And it does make, I agree with you, as far as these filmmakers and screenwriters still like refusing to acknowledge and celebrate that fact of the film, because again, it is so overtly obvious. You cannot argue against it, especially now because like I get at the time, if this was disappointing with reaction to it and people calling it gay, you want to be like, no, I didn't make a gay film, it's not my fault. I get that. But now, as you can see in the documentary, like horror has become so known as a place for where LGBT people can, flourish and be expressed and be seen on the big screen. You have these conventions and you have this support that I don't get why you would deny yourself or the film that identity. I would feel like it's something to embrace, even just like from a capitalistic standpoint, much less just that is your art form that you created and you you had some inspiration at some point to put that into the film. I also agree with you. I think that even though beyond the queerness, and I think this is something that gets really overlooked about the film, is like a lot of the effects are really, really fantastic
Really
here.
good,
Yes,
yeah.
maybe they're not Wes Craven. The roof, when they go to the roof, and the blood and him going through the wallpaper, those are iconic on a different level. But when Freddy Krueger is bursting out of him, I do agree the pool sequence is shot poorly, but I do like the mass bloodshed of that scene of Freddy Krueger just in this real world, just attacking all these people. Like, I think that is effective enough. One point, though, I'm going to disagree with you about: Kim Myers, Meryl Streep number 2, is good at parts. At the end, she is sitting there in this warehouse, and Freddy is like, your boyfriend is dead, your guy is dead, and she, in like the most unconvincing, really poor voice, just sits there and is like, Jesse, no, Jesse. And it's literally, I think, one of the worst line reads ever, and like such a key crucial moment. In that moment, I was like, Kim, we got it, we can't do Jesse, no. It's so bad, it's so bad. So I will disagree with you on that point, and that's my one real issue in this. I think is her in that scene really lets it down. But I think as a horror movie, even again beyond the subtext and even beyond the meaning, which I think hits on a really emotional, strong level, I just think this is like a fun, good. There's good. Not just good, there's great visual effects, there's great practical effects. That inspiration holds true from the original. I think a lot of people ignore that, and it's why when people go to this film and they watch this film and they're like, oh, I hate it, it didn't do anything for me, it completely shit on the original. I don't think you actually care that much about the lore, considering where the franchise goes, and you're probably okay with Dream
100%.
Child and everything. Like, there's something else here, and I feel like watching the movie, it isn't that big of a drop in quality from the original, so I feel like there's something else at play with those reactions. Yeah, I hope I answered your question, and somewhere in that.
No, I also agree to you to the extent of those people who are like, oh, it's so against the law. Like, but yeah, but like, I mean, law spelled Lore. Not that it's like we have to be careful about. Well, we don't know what's going to happen in the next few years. To be fair, that might become a premonition. But those people are like, I just don't like the direction of the mythology. Well, Wes Craven, the guy who made this, who wrote it, directed the first original, said that this was not built to be a franchise. It's one and done. So for me personally, like, the school's out. Like, wherever this goes now, there's no set rules. But just to go back to your point, to make it even more difficult to have this chat, is that when we had the conversation about having it made now, which I think you mentioned really wonderfully there, I think the irony of this, it's actually quite shocking to know this, but not to know this, but to have this conversation, sorry, is that we had this chat about 1985, and now these filmmakers or producers, writers, they're still scared, or at least presented not to want to at least bear honest there. I think if this was made now, people would be scared to death, because you would have to be careful about Freddy Krueger, who is a fictional character, being a homophobe. You'd also have to be careful who you directed here, because if you had a man in charge, there would be issues. But then if you had a female director, or a trans filmmaker, or a gay filmmaker, there would also be then issues, because, well, why is a trans filmmaker getting woke? Like, you'd have to deal with that. Then you'd have to deal with the issues of, well, how are we going to present sexuality and homophobia in this film? How are we able going to show the S&M stuff? How are we going to be able to do the weight of the issue? Not the issue, but the I keep on saying that, but we're having to show the weight of someone trying to find themselves. there's so many checklists there that have to be done in a range of seriousness as well, about vulnerability and also about perception, about horror icon. Then it becomes a capitalist issue about economics, because once you've got Freddy Krueger as a homophobe, how do you sell that? You could not do that now. And I think the fact that this came out in 1985, conscious or not, it was just made, is probably a testament to the idea of what you could get away with, but also the fact of it's blossomed into something that I think a lot of people can see and be like, oh, this is different, and it's positive for it. It would have to go through a rigid structure now, and it would be so diluted with test screenings and audience and organisations, granted some for better and others for worse, that it would dilute and mystify the whole thing about just a fictional character terrorizing someone. And I think the fact that it was made in the first place, I have to give plaudits that it's conscious or not, it's different, and it really does stand on its own 2 feet, and it's set aside, and the longevity it's had, and how it's evolved and grown. I think undoubtedly has positioned this to be a very unique, regardless of quality. It's still a very unique film in the pantheon of horror, especially within this franchise, especially in the slasher, and especially within the zeitgeist of the Scream Queen. There's a few others there, but not that stands as tall, as successful, and as almost as forgotten as this. So I think to anyone who says, "Oh, it shouldn't really have ever been made," I think it stands on its own 2 feet now, and ultimately, um, it really does speak for itself. So you can't really argue with the fact of it being made. I mean, again, it's issues because the 1985 sensitivity and texture, like you said, the whole homoerotic dance thing where he's like masturbating with like the tennis racket or whatever it is, and I'm like, there's obviously about 3 or 4 executives, 40-year-old, trying to think of what these characters would do and write that down. Like, we'll shoot that, and then we get like how do the chicks and guys dig, and like how do they have parties, and it just very much feels diluted of what you could get away with now. But they would never put this in the hands of anyone who would be distinctively different. They would never make a risk like this. I think even to that degree, for a franchise that I'm trying to think of the same thing now. It's like The Conjuring, right? Like, you've got to think of a widely successful horror franchise is only 4 films in the Conjuring franchise. I know that the whole thing is like 9, 12 films, but let's say the Conjuring's 4 films in, and the quality is diluted undoubtedly in the fourth film. You've got to think about if they tried to make something like Freddy's Revenge in something that was $150 million, that was a Warner Brothers franchise. Like, you're talking about something that's astronomical in proportion of being a success or not. Like, you're talking about 500, 600. You might be talking about $1 billion franchise here. Undoubtedly, probably is. They made a risk in 1985 to make something different, and it wouldn't be done now for those reasons. It's trying to sort of convince the audience here of what a seismic addition this is. Is that you've just got to think of a massive franchise. I think the closest you could probably get for different reasons is Season of the Witch, Halloween 3. You just don't have Michael Myers in it. That's like massive. Like, what? You don't have Michael Myers, but he's the face of it. Are you following what I mean? It's like there's a seismic
Absolutely,
there's a
yeah.
seismic difference to a formula that you just couldn't do now for a meteoric other reasons that I've mentioned. One is financial. You ostracize an audience. In 1985, you had no option. If you want to go watch that film, and Nightmare on Elm Street's out, yeah, you might be able to rent it on video in a few years, and you might get some reruns at a late night. But it's a massive thing. Now there's a whole host of it.
Yeah.
So
I,
yeah. So
Ironically, I think the examples that you give, those are the two, and then I would say New Nightmare. I think those are like the three big ones that you could point to. Even now, I think like current horror franchises. I remember in Scream 6, they subvert the opening by having it be the Ghostface takes off his mask, and then you get that opening segment, and people being like, "Wow, that's revolutionary." Or I guess Scream 4 is another good example. Maybe the Scream films, but those are like opening segments that play around with it. There's really none I can think of for the last 20 years, 30 years that subvert it as much as those examples that you gave. Yeah.
there's one that there's the Friday the 13th rip off. Not, but I really liked it. I can't remember. Is it a violent something?
And a violent nature, yeah.
Yeah, I think that does to some extent, but only within the visualization of it, only within the form. And even then, like it's still very much like on the nose of what it wants to achieve because that is the formula. Like you're talking about a film that 2023, 2024 from 1984. You know, you're talking about like 40 years on, or like even more so now, and you've still got that formula that works. You don't break away from that. And granted, I don't even to give this film less credit if I can. I don't think this even breaks away with formula. There's nothing much that this film actually does wrong. It plays to the formula. It just changes the character motives. It makes its antagonist even more insipid. It actually works more in the sense of like like he's just horrific with vulnerability. He's going after people because his kid's got he's just confused. Not even confused. He just doesn't know who he is at the moment. I mean, that's sick. That's like grooming. That's like that. If you saw that on the news of, a teenager who was vulnerable because they didn't really know who they were at that point, and someone of a position of power, wasn't very nice to that person or was grooming them, that's like a criminal offense. Like you would be ostracized from society for doing that. So the fact that this character's doing it, it's horrifying to watch. So the fact that I think it plays quite much to time, I don't think it does anything different. It uses its strengths of the time and does something different. It's shocking to know that a lot of I'll end on this, and you can move on to whatever you want to move on next because I think this is where it comes down to. I honestly do believe that if you ask any anyone with a common sense who likes this franchise or these films, if you ask them then if they like the film, they'd say no. Hand on heart, you can tell they would say no. I think I wasn't very keen on it at the beginning because it was just different. And I think different when you get a formula, you always ostracize it because it's different. It's only when you want to look at and recognize its differing things, then it becomes unique. And I think it uses its strength. I think a lot of audience members now who watch these films would probably highlight that, like me and you have, to suggest that it's actually quite unique and therefore quite interesting and quite intriguing, and therefore there's actually a reappraisal of it for different reasons. And then you look past not necessarily the issues that it's got, but look at what it's trying to achieve, and there's an appreciation there that I think becomes stronger and stronger. And I think undoubtedly, out of the however they are, 8 of 9 of them, and if there's some proper stinkers in them, like real stinkers, it probably is the second or third best film in there. I do remember liking the third one. I think New Nightmare is quite good, but it's just too. It's just not. It's not like the same films as it. It's unfair to say that. It probably goes the first one, this, then Dream Child. I don't even know. Honestly, I don't even know if it's that. I think it might be Dream Maker. I have no idea what they're called anymore. Dream Child, Dream Warriors, all that sort of shit. Freddy's dead. Freddy's revenge. Freddy's back. I don't know. They're all random. They're all very strange. Um, but yeah, I probably. Do you know another? Not to guys here, but another one that's not familiar, but is on the same wavelength that did something very different that has issues with a fan base is Army of Darkness.
Oh, that's a good shout.
Two films that come before it that very much are similar. Second one even remakes the first 15 minutes, and the third one just totally takes the formula and genre and bang something totally different. Then you've got a fourth and fifth one that repeat the same things that the first and second did. All that does is makes the third one even more unique. So by trying to get themselves back on track in their eyes, it actually enforces how different and distinctive and therefore popular that ostracized one becomes, which is very interesting considering that if you look at, not to get in politics here, but it's just very interesting, that, isn't it? The more that you try to put something away, the more it seems to come back, and more that wants to blossom. Um, and then yeah, I don't know. That's very interesting, isn't it? I don't know. Maybe
Or
that's
the more time you try to shove something down with inside you, it comes out more and more and
there. You
causes
go.
more and more of
Yeah,
an instant.
there is an irony
Interesting.
there. Yeah, there is a very interesting irony there. But it was really fun to
Yep.
watch this and have fun with it and know what it was about. I'd yeah, and I also think, like, what were people thinking in 1985? Like, people were like, that's interesting, isn't it? That's interesting. It's like, it's very openly camp. It's very openly queer. Yeah, I really enjoyed watching this again, and especially I watched all these these films quite close together.
Yeah.
I didn't watch the documentary because I watched it last year, and I find that, I didn't know about you, but I thought it was quite traumatizing to watch because
Yeah.
it's very personal, and it's difficult to not be on the same page, because it's just, I've not lived that life. I not even not lived that life on a sexual on a sexuality spectrum, but even to the degree of being like ostracized or wanting to leave an industry because you weren't very confident, or you weren't deemed to be this icon, or you were subjected to certain things. There's a heartbreaking thing about that where I find it quite a difficult watch, but I would implore anyone to watch it like you said, but watch them back to back for a slight appreciation. And also, I'd if I was going to watch these films, and I don't know about you, I probably would take more breathing space between them as well. Don't watch them back to back, the Nightmare on Elm Street films, because I think this is a film that ultimately suffers because of that. For me, anyway.
I would agree that I think, especially this one, really take out of the lineup and watch on its own. I think this is the first time. Well, actually, I know it's my first time. It's my second time seeing this. That I didn't watch it with the original attached in any way. I haven't watched the original for a year. Definitely watch this. Definitely watch the documentary. The documentary is a lot more personal than I thought I was expecting it to be. I thought it was going to be much more and almost like a video essay on what the queerness within the film is, but it really is about this guy's life and about his emotions and his journey, which is really, really deeply authentic. I mean, obviously, I've not experienced something on his level where literally the entire world are on the face of these magazines and everyone is calling you an F slur. But it is something to where I think a lot of queer people can relate to pieces of his story. Really powerful stuff. I mean, even the ending of this, where he eventually gets with the girl and he eventually feels like he put this behind him, but there's still the classic Freddy last minute jump scare. Even that has like a really poignant edge to it when you think about it. It's a film that is not only, I think, really meaningful and purposeful and emotional, but it's also, as you mentioned, very fun, very campy. Our lead actor, Mark Patton, is like a blast in this film. He is so campy and fun. This is definitely one where like every Halloween season I get the urge to watch with friends. Like I definitely will host like viewing parties of this, and I think in the documentary it shows them watching it in a theater with like a drag queen host every single year, and that looks like an absolute blast to do with this film. I am pretty certain that this is my favorite. It would definitely only be between this and the first one for me. I really do not care about number 3 or any of the others, but I do think if you're going to watch these, take them with time. I mean, especially these first, there's really 3 chunks, right? Where there's the original, there's the second one, and then you get the third one, but that bleeds into the 4th and 5th.
Yeah.
I think with any franchise, I think especially retroactively watching them, whether it's Halloween, Friday the 13th, Saw, literally any of these franchises, it's really easy to program just like, oh, I'm going to watch them all in a week. And I think there's a lot of joy in that, especially like Saw is great to watch in a week because it all takes place in a week and it's funny and there's references and it builds like that. But I think sometimes it's easy to forget the individualism of each entry. And that's one thing with like new releases. I like the fact that we can watch a new release and then have a year or 2 years to digest it before we get the next entry. Where if you watch it retroactively like this, you probably bang through 1 or 2 a day and just get through them. I think this one especially though, really has a lot to it that deserves to be critically analyzed and thought about individually. It is one that sticks with me. I think a lot about it after I watched it.
Yeah.
And again, very rich with that documentary. So I echo pretty much all your thoughts. I think it's fantastic. I think it's a great horror movie. I think it's a great not Friday the 13th. It's a great Nightmare on Elm Street film. A great queer film. I think it has all the elements for me to be like just a complete masterpiece and one that I know I will return to. Also, super quick, super clean. Only 87 minutes. Never outstays its welcome. Very, very enjoyable for me at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's on its anniversary this year as well. It's 40th year.
Oh
So
yeah,
there's some poignancy there as well. And I think I have to say as well, to put some finality on it, I do think that the fact this is 40 years old, there's a lot of films that don't even come close to being this open and honest about it. Like, be
yeah.
like, yeah, like, yep, that character is insipid, he's horrible, he's venomous, and he's going after Jesse because he's gay. Like, there's like an openness and honesty about this film. And granted, you can look at it very much on the basis of context or subtext, although I think this is very much openly on the former rather than the latter. But as a viewer, if you don't want to look at that and you don't want to be indulged into that part of it, I think you can still appreciate the fact that it's quite an effective horror film. But
Yeah.
alas, I think separating the two does a disservice to the project in general. But the shocking part of that is, and not to put the negative spin as a classic ClapperCast staple that we do, but 40 years later, there's very few films that come close to this being openly divulge into the idea of just sexuality and horror. I mean, I can't. I mean, I bar the more independent labels of the last few years. There's nothing in a
Yeah.
mainstream that comes quite close to this. Although there's probably people screaming at me now, going, "What about this? What about this?" But I have to say, like, I just don't. I don't know. It'd probably be more effective to ask you that question, but I don't know. I don't see anything that 40 years later quite
No,
touches
I
as
would
you.
agree. I also think there's something interesting about queer films in general, where like I compare this and Bros very similarly to where they're putting a queer's context in a film whose formula and structure and identity is ultimately something very standard. And I think there's a great power to that. I think there's a lot of times where queerness, and this is not at all like negative, there's so many great queer films that we've talked about on this podcast and we've both seen individually that queerness is a unique identity, so it makes sense that the art reflecting that emotion would be incredibly unique. But there's also
Yeah.
something poignant about seeing a horror movie, seeing a slasher mainstream horror movie like this just surround itself and build its content with queerness without changing necessarily some of the core foundations of what it means to be a scream queen or what it means to be one of these features. Similar to Bros with romantic comedy, that's a very standard romantic comedy, but I love it for that fact. I think that is a strength, not a weakness. I think with queer art, and as we go about continuing to see queer art, that is something that some people reject that I really welcome and I think is really empowering in its own way. So I also appreciate that of the film.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's interesting to look at. We have like twists and turns within the horror dynamic where we have just features that don't represent society and others that are a reflection of it. I mean, I'm going to say it again, but I keep on thinking about 28 years later. I keep on thinking
Mm,
about every other week of how effective that was to look at Britain and look at society and what is evil. And I know that there's a lot of reflections about that. I mean, Halloween's tried to do it, and the Jason Voorhees stuff. Like, what is a reflection of society? Is it that we make evil, or evil is always going to be a natural selection? It's always an interesting conversation to have, but it's very much an elevated art form in horror now, where
yeah.
they're very much looking at it directly rather than indirectly. And this one is a feature that sort of marries the two of them, where it's an effective horror film and also effective comment about social standings and the political structures, and not political structures, but sort of like the social political stuff, but more so identity politics and stuff like that. And I think again, 40 years later, and it was just it was done, and people are still scared about having those conversations about it.
Yeah.
That's the thing that I keeps on getting on the back of my mind. Here, I'm like, I might need to watch a documentary again, but I mean, I think I was reading about it today, like after the documentary, like 4 or 5 years later, people are just like resisting the conversation to be like, I don't know why this is not a lot applauded and to be like, we made a really dynamic feature that was so far ahead of its time, and I think it is getting a reappraisal. But I think that the fact that people don't want to talk about it because they're so scared now about about the offence or offending someone, or just the idea of perhaps touching on subjects that can cause offence, has really limited this feature within an art form that's very expressive. And granted, I know that's really easy for me to say as a straight white male, and I appreciate that to some degree. But art, like you've said, this podcast is a reflective of either the consciousness, or more importantly, the subconsciousness, an array of issues that come out of that. If it's what we've done about Fritz Lang, about German expressionism, that's where that forms from. Horror, by very definition, like you said before, um, comes from the creator's subconsciousness and its minds, his fears, her insecurities, his viewpoints on certain things. It's an interesting uh, kaleidoscope of just conversations, and I think it's shocking now that we've accepted that you couldn't make this now, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to do, aside from the issues of being scared about vulnerability, which the whole part of this film is by definition, is a kid who is scared of vulnerability. I mean, there's like the bitterness of irony there is just shocking. But you just got to have hope for the genre, haven't you? But I think we're getting there. Like I said, I think the reappraisal's there, and I think it's really effective horror. And I think if it was just more appreciated by its inner circle, because I know Rob Englund hates it. I think what Wes Craven hates it, and I think that's unfortunate. It's her opinion. I don't mind. I can understand why Wes Craven would hate this, because it was like, why is someone making a sequel to what I wanted to make? And I can understand that. Like John Carpenter with Halloween, I can understand that. But I think if more people were a little bit more, I mean, this is a month to celebrate as well, so I'm just hoping that there's a lot more people on Letterboxd who've done it. But we've done our service anyway. We've reviewed it, and even if we didn't like it, there's a lot of appreciation here, and I think we can see above that.
For sure.
But yeah, so I just hope, like probably you do, that I think this is a time in its 40th year to get some eyes on it. So, and I'm sure it'll be screened at Fantastic Fest, Fantasia, and stuff like that. And it's definitely got a home. So yeah, I'm glad that time has been kind to it. It's been a positive experience. I hope for those who can appreciate it, and I hope that there's some semblance of peace for those who felt ostracized and not beneficial to the experience. I hope that there can be some peace there, because it's probably done. It'll probably grow to be even more important within the genre, which is probably quite upsetting to be to be fair. But we're positive, Cass, and we're positive.
Of course. Hey, we are positive. This is a good movie, and I'm happy that on its 40th anniversary, we were able to give it some love and attention, and hopefully push someone to watch it. And I think this would make a fantastic viewing. Almost to be clear on it released November 1st. This episode is releasing October 31st, so literally almost on its 40th anniversary.
Wow.
So I think there's a beauty in that, and I'm happy we could talk about it today. Well, again, we both recommend you watch this film. I want to close this because it is Halloween. If anyone is free tonight and just has time where they want to watch some horror movies, I would love if we each could share just a quick recommendation. This would be our question of the week, let's say, on what we should watch on Halloween. And I can quickly go because mine is going to jump to another connoisseur of horror, John Carpenter. This year, I watched Christine for the first time, 1983. Blown away by the film. All I knew is that it was like the killer car movie, based obviously on Stephen King. I wish Jakob was here, and one day I'm sure we'll do an episode on it and Jakob can join because I know he loves Stephen King. I was blown away. Again, taking a concept that's kind of silly, kind of fun. Okay, you get this car that kills people, and there is so much within this film that you can read into about gender politics, about abuse, physical harassment. It is a tale in a car form, obviously, but of a woman reclaiming her power, getting revenge, and literally like murdering the people who physically abuse her. fantastic movie, great effects, super fun. Obviously Carpenter is a great director, but I'm not necessarily always the strongest on him. I know I'm not the
Mhm.
hugest fan, to be honest, with Halloween films. The Thing is great for sure, but this is one that like really impressed me and blew my expectations out of the water. So if anyone's not seen Christine, it's currently streaming even on the Criterion channel here in America. So I would definitely give that a go. Jack, I know you've seen a lot of great horror movies. What would you recommend for people to watch?
I'm going to do a slight cop out here because I know I've mentioned this film before, but I still like I adore this film. My first there's going to be two here because I feel like there's a point into this podcast. But the first one, my personal opinion, go watch Peter Jackson's The Frighteners. It's one of my favorite films. And Arrow Video have just released, well, not released, it's like 2 years old now, but a collection of it. There's two versions of it. Watch the director's cut. Michael J. Fox in one of his probably last major roles. Jackson before he went on to do Lord of the Rings. So there's a little bit of filmmaking quality there that rhymes with Lord of the Rings, and also it's fun, it's scary, it still holds up really, really great. It's really scary. It reminds me of watching it as a kid. Go out and watch that, The Frighteners. But also as well, it's a 40th anniversary. Go watch this. Go watch A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Go reappraise it if you don't like it. Brilliant. But just go watch it. It's only it's 85 minutes, like you said. It's easy. You could watch it on the train. You could watch it on the bus to work, or watch it on your day off. This Halloween, watch A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2 and watch something that's a little bit different, a little bit unique, and appreciate those little small things that are effective, and look at things in a different viewpoint, in a different era, and then try to look it through the prism now. But go out there and just enjoy it. Just go watch it. I hope it gets loads of logs this year, which I think it
Yeah,
will do.
we better see all you on Letterboxd reviewing and logging this for sure.
Yeah, Jacob Flash. This is terrible. I hate this. No doubt, but
1 star
no.
for sure.
Yeah,
That's okay though. Can't win them all, right?
no. Long as the Beyonce documentary got us through, that was enough for me. I didn't need anything else.
That's true. That is very true. With that, I think that's going to do it for our episode today. Jack, thank you so much for joining me another Halloween. I'm so excited. Ending the road to Halloween, obviously on Halloween, but that just means we get to explore more cinema starting next month, starting with the Wachowskis' Speed Racer. You want to talk about a unique film, a film that maybe at the time of release didn't get some of the love it maybe should have, but has also been heavily reappraised. I think that's going to be a great conversation, and I cannot wait to get into that film next week. So with that, Jack, where can we find you on social media?
You can find me on Clapper, Letterbox, and Twitter, which I don't really use, where the username at Jak-Luke Sharp. I'm doing a lot of Hooptober. I've still got a lot of backlog to do from July, but I've got loads to do. I really enjoyed this Halloween series. It's always a pleasure to talk to you on this podcast. You know I love you to pieces. And to talk about movies that don't really get a conversation on is always really interesting. But just to talk about different perspectives on the films in general, if it's this or Speed Race or whatever we do, it's always an absolute pleasure. So thank you very much for having me, and I've always really enjoyed. You always seem to do a really good program in Halloween, so it's just an absolute pleasure for you to be invited, and you to invite me on here. So thank you very much for spending some time with me, Carson. I really do appreciate it.
Oh no, I appreciate you and Nick and everyone, Michael, who've joined me this Halloween season. I mean, any podcast where I can program to where like on Halloween, we're talking about Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Not a lot of podcasts do that. So I appreciate that I have friends in my life who will join me for this and have some great discussions on cinema, promoting good cinema, talking about Todd Browning, talking about everything we talked about. So thank you and everyone else. You can find me on Blue Sky and Letterboxd, just Carson Timar. Again, thank you so much for joining us this entire Halloween season, and more ClapperCast to come. Goodbye.